Welcome to the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, JamesBFauntleroy. So good to see all of you here on this Thursday evening. Yes, I am live. This is my official first live since being back from the hospital. So good to see all of you joining me for this reading. And it is, of course, it's always familiar territory, but at the same time, it feels good to be back where I was and trying to educate myself and bring along other students with me as well as part of the education. So thank you so very much for joining in. This channel is also part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. So you can find me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, Sundays for the JB show, and typically here on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. for my regular show when I go over news stories and do interviews. So thank you very much for that. Also, by the way, if you have not already, go ahead and give a like to the stream. That helps me out a ton. Thank you so very much for all your contributions, all of your support in keeping this channel afloat. It's been a wild ride, but I just want to say thank you to everybody for keeping me going and letting me know that you're there for me. So thank you so very much for that. All right, if you guys have not, you guys can also subscribe to my Substack at jaybefaunt.substack.com. This gives you email notifications whenever I go live, upload clips, or write any articles. So you guys have that there. Also, if you're on the email list, about 20 minutes before the stream starts, you'll get a notification that my stream is about to start in 20 minutes. So then you have that there instead of having to rely on the YouTube bell to notify you whenever I go live. So you guys have that there too. And also, if you guys would like to ask me any type of questions and I give a video response to you, you guys can go to qbounty.com/Jaybefaunt. So thank you so very much for that as well. So it is good to see all of you here today. I have my tea. I am feeling pretty decent right now. And first, before we get to the reading, because this is a live, let's go to the chat and say hello to a few people. All right. Now, I have to say this. I don't know what's going on with my Rockfin channel. Apparently, my Rockfin channel's gone. I don't know why. I came to set up the stream for this. Rockfin channel was not there. I was having trouble with the Rumble. Rumble is giving me trouble as well. So there's no Rumble. So shout out to everybody that's watching on YouTube and Twitter. And thank you so very much for joining in. And I'm sorry about the Rockfin. Like, I don't know if all my videos are gone. I don't know if they're all deleted. But I was gone for 17 days. So I don't know what happened. So I'm going to have to check in with Rockfin on that one. That's a whole other house cleaning thing that I have to deal with on top of everything else. But sis lovey. Anyway, let's get to the comments in the chat. All right, so let's say hello to everybody. We got Kate Mack starting off, said, oh my God, it's so great to see you. Love, hope you're feeling better. I am feeling better. I am trying to, do my best to recover. If you guys notice, I'm moving just a little bit slower. That's on purpose, because I want to be more distinct in what I say, as well as I want to be someone that helps people to understand as much as possible. One thing that was taught to me, and I'll never forget this, is that the key to somebody who can teach is not about how smart they sound or how smart they appear. It is the ability to get the person who's listening to them to understand and apply the concepts in which they are teaching. even if I have to use as plain layman's terms as possible, it doesn't matter. As long as it's effective and as long as it works. And the thing is that part of being a revolutionary is teaching. That is one of the strongest, most powerful points in a revolution, is for people to know better so that they do better. I'm trying to do the same myself. So thank you very much for that. Terry Connolly coming in saying, hello, James. Good to see you, Terry. Roger says, make sure to peep DM. I will. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to my rock fin. I got to check it out. I honestly, like, I don't even know, like, if you guys were like to come on my Rockfin and see, does my channel still exist? I don't know if my Rockfin channel still exists. It shows me up as just a user, not a creator. So I don't know what's going on with that. Jacqueline says, hey, JB, it's lovely to see you back. How are you? I'm doing okay. I am recovering and I am feeling pretty good, by the way. All right. And yes, I know, like a good barber, Roger is there. He lined me up. Thank you so very much. Michael says, how are you doing today? Did your health insurance pay everything? I don't think so. I'll give you a little bit of a preview. My primary care physician wanted me to come in for a hospital follow-up as soon as possible. And I told him I can't come in because I can't afford the copay. So I can't see my primary. And then I have hospital follow-ups from 3 different doctors that I saw all at the same hospital around the same time and all at different times now. And some want me to go this far, and it's like, I can't. So it's a lot. Yeah. All right. Who else we got in the chat? We have Zoe coming in saying, so ball. All right. Good to see you. Thank you so very much. We got Lady Alex coming in saying, happy you're feeling better. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. It means a lot, especially after going through what I went through. The simple things really matter, and they really have an impact on you. I don't want to bore you guys with this, but it was Tuesday. I decided to put my earbuds in because I've been without them for like 2.5 weeks. I turned on a video game and I was jamming to music. And as soon as the first song came on, I started to cry. Because I felt more like myself again. And yeah, some people will be like, oh, it was only 2 weeks in a hospital. 2 weeks in a hospital is a long time. And the pain and the procedures and the constant, lack of rest, because you don't rest in hospitals, really. It bears on you. So I felt like myself again. So that was good. Zoe, was someone watering your plants? No, I think my mother forgot, and now my poor plants. I'm probably just gonna have to get some ferns. I feel bad. Like, this one's still holding on. I'm gonna water it tonight, but I just don't know. Like, there was some new growth coming out of that. I'm gonna try to water it, but I'm trying to keep the life around me. So yeah, thank you very much. Savitha says, hey JB, nice to see you. Good to see you, Savitha. Nice to have you as well. Jacqueline says, I've been watching your back catalog of live streams on the Jaybefaunt channel. The Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti is really good so far. Pretty shocking since it was written 30 years ago. Yes, that was one of my first books that I actually did a reading on, was Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti. And if you guys would like to, there's an actual playlist on this channel if you guys would like to get into those readings. He gets into a lot of deep stuff too. Your channel still on the rock, still shows JC Countdown. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna have to get in touch with the guys at Rockfin to see what's going on. So thank you very much for that, Roger. I appreciate it. How much is it? Can we crowdfund it? I don't know yet. I haven't gotten any bills. And right now, I medically, I have bills on top of bills. Like, I already have bills that are still like, they're just about to go into collections. Like, that's how much I've accumulated. And reminder, I've been on dialysis for about 17 years. And so, yes, I do have insurance, Medicare, right? And Medicaid. Well, they downgraded my Medicaid from full Medicaid to Medicaid share of cost because I make too much, whatever that means. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I have. Have you still have a coffee account? I do. I just have not checked it in a long time, but I do. I do. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, yeah. Roy Ayers, my life, my life, my life, my life in the sunshine. Yeah, yeah. That was, that was sad. Of course. And what happened to Angie Stone? Oh my gosh. And oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking on her name. Ah! Oh my God. Okay. And Roger says, don't tell Sebby, but I got her B-Day present waiting for her when she comes over the weekend. Oh, that's nice. That's awesome. I can't wait to hear about it. All right. So let's get into this reading because this is one of the things that I wanted to get into. We're going to be talking about Reconstruction era, right? This is the beginning of the Reconstruction. And as somebody that's a Black American, this is directly affects me and my lineage, my status as a person within this country. Myself and my cousins, we were the first people in our family born with full rights as citizens in this country. I'm only 40. And my oldest cousin is only 50. My mom, aunts, uncles, some cousins, they weren't born with full rights. So we are the first generation of full rights. Well, full rights, whatever it means in this country. But I just want to give the weight of how powerful the Reconstruction era was and the lack of enthusiasm to push it through to its true fruition to what it was supposed to be. So, and yes, Roberta Flack, yes. That was sad. We still got Melba Moore though. Thank God. And oh my goodness. We still have Stephanie Mills. Whew! We still got Stephanie Mills. Lord, do not let anything happen to Stephanie Mills. I feel good. I feel good all over. Anyway, all right. So let's get into it. All right. We're going to do our usual thing because we're back in the South. Reading of Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents by Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a comrade and friend to the channel. So we're starting on, doesn't see 84, that would be 83, 82, page 81. So this is the Reconstruction era from 1862 to 1901, right? So in these, it talks about in 1865, nearly 200,000 Black people served as United States Colored Troops, USCT, in the Civil War. In 1865, the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, but makes an exception for imprisonment. 1866, Frederick Douglass leads a delegation petitioning for federal law ensuring the votes for African Americans, which Andrew Johnson rejects. 1868, Louisiana voters send John W. Minard, a Black man, to Congress, but he is barred from taking his seat by white members of Congress. 1870, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution allows Black men to vote. 1900, the number of Black people in the United States has doubled in the past 4 decades and now stands at 8.8 million. 1900, the average life expectancy for Black people is 33 years. For white people, it's 47. All right, so who is the first president we're talking about during Reconstruction? Well, don't have to go far. Straight hit to him. Abraham Lincoln. So, Abraham Lincoln is going to be our first one we're going to talk about, the 16th president of the United States from 1861 to 1865. Like, I hope you guys got your tea ready. I have mine, and we're going to get into it. All righty. Abraham Lincoln was long credited with being the great emancipator and the anti-slavery president. He was, in fact, quite openly racist and often expressed the belief in keeping America a nation of, by, and for white people. On December 31st, 1862, he signed an agreement with one Bernard Koch to take 435 Black so-called contrabands to Île à la Viche, a satellite island off the coast of Haiti. The next day, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but the fact that he had also negotiated a colonization scheme, which he had likely intended to accompany and complement the proclamation, is largely unknown. Lincoln is quintessential American hero. Much of the mythology surrounding him is worse than the sympathetic exaggeration. Lincoln lore is mostly made up of lies. One of his most outspoken detractors was radical abolitionist Wendell Phillips. Lincoln continued advocacy of colonization, the forced migration of Black people out of the country, inspired Phillips to call him a first-rate, second-rate man. Lincoln was a consummate politician. You had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, to fight a war to end slavery, and ultimately went to war only to save the Union. The Republican Party was founded to prevent the spread of slavery to the Western territories, not necessarily to abolish it. Let me read that again. The Republican Party was founded to prevent the spread of slavery into Western territories, not necessarily to abolish it. It's time for you to take a sip. Because that's some tea if I ever heard it. Right? Abraham Lincoln made it quite clear that he had no intention of ending slavery where it already existed. Yet his attempt to continue the compromises of the previous 100 years were not enough to keep the slaveocracy mollified. They struck first by Lincoln's design to attract public support for the Union as defender rather than aggressor at Fort Sumter, South Carolina in 1861. Lincoln is often referred to as the man who personally prosecuted the war and insisted on the defeat of the Confederacy. It is true that he sat by the telegraph and eagerly awaited news of battles. He did fire underperforming generals and lament when they didn't pursue the Confederates. But he would have done none of those things if the Confederates hadn't rebuffed his efforts to compensate them in exchange for their freed slaves, or if he hadn't reneged on this promise not to tamper with the institution where it existed. So when it comes to somebody like Abraham Lincoln, people think, well, he was an abolitionist president. No, he wasn't. No, it was he wanted to keep the institution of slavery. He just didn't want it to spread. Right? It kind of makes me think about it. I don't know if I can like it like this, but I'm thinking about like the legalization of marijuana, correct? 30 years ago, it would have been unheard of to have it legalized recreationally. And so, of course, they decriminalized it, and they wanted to stop the spread, But then it started to become legalized, and a lot of states some states reluctantly had to legalize it because their constituencies wanted it to be so. So they did it through constitutional amendments. But at the same time, when it comes to the people who are still in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, especially with marijuana possession and things like that, well, they're still in prison. They're still serving time for something that is now considered to be legal. Now, that's not a one-to-one ratio, but it kind of reminds me of that. When it comes to, it's like you don't want to take the cancer out. You just want to stop the spread. But the problem is that if you don't take it out, it will continue to spread. But if you just don't want to take it out and it still might spread, well, do you really actually care about the condition of the patient? Because that's the one of the underlying causes. Something to think about. Most importantly, he would have never have finally waged a war of abolition if the enslaved themselves had not forced him to do so. Forced him. Right? On May 23rd, 1861, 3 enslaved men, Shepard Mallory, Frank Baker, and James Townsend, rowed across the James River in Virginia into Union-held territory at Fort Monroe. Despite federal policy, which required that they be returned to their slaveholders, General Benjamin Butler decided to keep them as contraband of war. The Lincoln administration chose not to punish Butler, and in the ensuing weeks, more runaways turned up at Fort Monroe. Within a month, 500 men, women, and children had taken refuge there. As the war dragged on, the enslaved began freeing themselves wherever Union forces appeared. While Northerners debated whether the war was being fought over slavery, The enslaved answered in the affirmative and declared that there was no turning back. So they were actually debating, is this over slavery? Is it over slavery? What do you mean? Is it really over slavery? The northern states were questioning what it was actually about. Meanwhile, you got the slaves in the Confederate states that are going, yeah, it's about us, right? It reminds me here in the United States where we hand wring and we praying about, oh, well, what is this war that's happening between Israel and Palestine? It's such a complex issue, and it's this religion versus that religion, and all these different convoluted things. When in reality, Palestinians are going, no, it's because they just want to take our land. They want to steal the resources. That it's very simple. So the thing is that sometimes, and this is one of the things that we have to be careful about, getting too academic in our theorizing, is that we'll try to make it something more complex than what it really is. It's just like the people who go, oh my God, well, you got the Illuminati who are meeting in secret societies, and the bone and crossbows and all this other different stuff, and they're doing all these nefarious things, and they're worshiping Satan and stuff like that. And it's like, no, they're just greedy capitalists. You're giving them too much credit. They're just greedy capitalists that want to extract the resources of all the people that they can in the world. But now you have the world rejecting it, and it's making it impossible for them to commit imperialism. So what do? They take the imperialism and they turn it inward to extract more out of us instead, which is why we're going through the inflationary period that we're going through right now, which is why you have Trump being the blustering idiot on Capitol Hill that he was a couple of days ago. And so this is really just now the fascism, because fascism is just imperialism turned inward. So now we're experiencing fascism on an overt level instead of a covert level. But we're not going to just go into all these different conspiracy theories. It's like, no, they're just greedy ass capitalists that want to extract the resources. This is the thing. And when it comes to the pre-Reconstruction era, what the northern states were debating was it was nonsense. It was in their face. But you have some educated fools that were trying to think there was something other than that. There could be no more waffling about whether the Union there could be no more waffling about whether the Union should maintain slavery. The Union can only be restored without slavery, and the North would have to defeat the South militarily to do it. Phillips made clear that it would be said that Lincoln had grown. It was because we watered him. He was watered by Confederate intransience and the determination of the enslaved to become free. Lincoln is remembered as a martyr in a large part because he was assassinated immediately after the war ended. It is easy to see him as heroic precisely because of how he was killed. In support of the fugitive slave law, Lincoln stated, "We are under a legal obligation to catch and return the runaway slaves. I confess I hate to see them hunted down and carried back to their stripes and unrequited toil, but I bite my lips and I keep quiet." Phillips again responded, calling Lincoln the slave hound of Illinois. Lincoln told Black people to their faces that they should leave the country and blame them and their presence for the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln was a coward. We're not going to mince words on this channel because we know who he is. It's in the history books, despite what some people want to misrepresent because they're trying to show this shining example of what America is. No. If you want to know the truth about America, you got to get into all of the nitty-gritty details, the dirty deeds, right? And this is some of the dirty deeds. Is that somebody like Abraham Lincoln did not intend to actually free the slaves. He was no abolitionist. He was no friend of Black people. It was because he was just trying to keep the Union together. Ending slavery was more of a, even though it was the reason, it was more of a secondary thing that, oh yeah, and by the way, you guys will be free. But we just got to keep the Union together. It was never really about us. His motivations weren't about us. His motivations were about keeping it together. So his drive to emancipate us was secondary, not primary. Lincoln never gave up his dream of colonization, a dream of fulfilling the settler colonial project and making America a nation for Anglo-Saxons. He established an office to promote colonization within the Interior Department and hired Reverend James Mitchell to develop a colonization plan, naming him the U.S. Commissioner of Negro Colonization. One colony nearly came to fruition in the Shiquiri region of Panama until Central American governments protested. Mitchell wrote Lincoln the letter on the relations of the white and African races in the United States, showing the necessity of the colonization of the latter. Mitchell didn't mince words, encouraging the president on the first of 28 pages to produce the separation of those races, the removal of the colored race to a proper locality, and establish an independence there. They tried to Israel us. Oh, you didn't think we would go there. Yes, they tried to Israel us. Guess what? Because exactly the same way that Britain did, because Britain largely was anti-Semitic and they didn't like Jewish people, and they said, you guys go over there to Palestine. We give you permission. Go ahead. Go to Palestine. Get away from us. They were trying to do the same thing to us, to ship all of us to Panama, to take land away from indigenous people in Panama because they didn't like us, even though they were the ones who stole us. They were the ones who subjected us to chattel slavery. And now they don't want to pay for what they have done to us. They want to just, okay, you're free. Now get the hell out. That's what it was. That's who Abraham Lincoln was. And it was a colonial project, a settler colonial project, just like Israel. History may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. So yeah, they tried to do the same thing with us. And they succeeded in some ways. Like, for instance, I think something happened in Liberia. But it's like, no, y'all brought us here. So if y'all brought us here, then you give us what you got. You don't take something from somebody else and just say, here. No. That's the Panamanians' land. Not ours and not yours. Who are you giving land that doesn't belong to you? So if you're going to pay us, you're going to pay us out of your own. You're not just going to ship us off like that. But that's what they wanted to do. Let's continue. On August 14th, 1862, Lincoln met with a group of 5 black pastors selected by Mitchell and told them that he wanted them and their people out of the country. Quote, "But for your race among us, there could not be a war. Although many men engaged on either side do not care for you one way or another. Nevertheless, I repeat, without the institution of slavery and the colored race as a basis, the war would not have an existence." So you stole us, put us in chains, beat, raped, killed, maimed, and traumatized us. And then you say, well, we wouldn't have fought against each other if it wasn't for you guys. Does that sound fair to you? Does that sound just to you? America has never been like this. History says otherwise, baby. God, I can't wait to have Margaret Kimberly on to talk about this book. Let's continue. This determination to carry out the plan for ethnic cleansing had a very dangerous repercussions for Black people who lived in a precarious existence, whether or not they were enslaved or free. At the time of Lincoln's meeting with intelligent colored men, a wave of violence was falling upon Black communities around the country. On August 6, 1862, the New York Tribune reported that violence commenced weeks ago in Cincinnati, Evansville, Indiana, and Toledo. In Brooklyn, a mob attacked Black workers at a tobacco factory and attempted to burn it down with the workers inside. Lincoln was nothing if not consistent. After his meeting with Black leaders, after violent attacks on Black people, he continued to link emancipation to colonization. On September 23, 1862, he met with his cabinet to discuss the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation and made it clear his determination to send Black people out of the country. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles reported on the meeting, quote, "This was a part of the president's scheme and had occupied his mind sometime before the project for emancipation was adopted, although the historians, biographers, and commenters have made a slight, if any, allusion to it. The president, however, and a portion of his cabinet considered them inseparable, and that deportation should accompany and be part of the emancipation movement." Not only was emancipation tied to colonization, but so was compensation to the slave holders, which Lincoln proposed in his congressional address on December 1st, 1862, while giving them until January 1900 to complete the process of emancipation. So dedicated are historians to whitewashing history that they lie about the evidence that is quite easy to find. Benjamin Butler's account of being asked to develop yet another colonization plan just days before Lincoln's assassination is continually called into question. Anyone questioning whether Lincoln was the great emancipator is rebuffed. He may have said in his second inaugural address in March 1865, quote, "If God wills that the Civil War continue until all the wealth piled on the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword." But it was this instance of the slaves and former slaves themselves, of radical abolitionists and intransigent Confederates, that forced him to utter such words shortly before he died. It is imperative that we debunk the myth that Lincoln acted initially out of a motivation to help Black people. Spreading and continuing this falsehood makes the study of history a sham and keeps Americans uninformed about their past and their present. So that's about Abraham Lincoln. And with that being said, you know, you got to realize, right? I don't know of any president that was actually truthfully a friend and in solidarity with Black people. The closest I can think of might be Kennedy. Maybe. But even still, I'm shifty-eyed on that. But look, we're at 47 presidents now. 99% of them are not a friend to Black Americans. .99% of them, including Obama. Because if he was actually a friend of ours, Black wealth wouldn't have tanked under him. So, shall we go to the next one? Let's go to 17. His vice president, Andrew Johnson. He like a meme bug. You know who Andrew Johnson looks like? You guys remember, oh my goodness. You guys remember Ghostbusters? The evil guy that was under, the building with the slime? Right? The guy in the portrait that was trying to get a hold of that baby. And then he made Sigourney Weaver he put Sigourney Weaver under his control. Oh, you're a god. Oh gosh. I'm sorry. My imagination, guys. So hey, I'm back. All right. Andrew Johnson. So let's get to Andrew Johnson right now. 1865 to 1869. Andrew Johnson was a Tennessee senator who tried to keep his state from seceding along with the rest of the South after Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. His motivation clearly was not to end slavery, as he owned 8 human beings himself. He railed against the power of the slave-owning aristocrats, but when he replaced Lincoln's first vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, in 1865, and then became president after Lincoln's assassination, he made it clear that he believed in the government of, for, and by white people. Johnson had his own presidential ambitions and had hoped to be the Democratic Party candidate in 1860. Stephen Douglas won that contest, but Johnson did his best to promote Southern slaveholding interests despite his loss. He argued to his fellow Southerners that they might be able to keep Lincoln in check should he attempt to do more than stop the spread of slavery. His plea for unity was an effort to keep the slavocracy on top in American politics. He knew that secession would mean the end of slavery. He ended up having to flee from his state, but as the only Southerner to keep his congressional seat after secession. He placed himself in a powerful position in the Lincoln administration. Lincoln appointed Johnson as a military governor of Tennessee in 1862. Johnson seemed to continue his pro-union efforts as he demanded loyalty oaths from local officials and shut down newspapers supportive of the Confederacy. But he also allowed slaveholders to search contraband groups for their runaway property. He even refused to provide tents or other shelter to the contraband camps in the winters of 1863. He asked Lincoln to exempt Tennessee from the Emancipation Proclamation, and the president agreed, leaving Black people enslaved in a state that was mostly in Union hands. He eventually had to take steps towards emancipation, but in doing so, he managed to get compensation for the Union slaveholders in the amount of $300 for every manumitted man who signed up for service. So slave owners, Union slave owners, got reparations. Funny how that works. The nature of Johnson's wartime relationship with Black people played out again after Lincoln's assassination delivered him into the presidency. The Freedmen's Bureau Bill of 1865 called for providing lots of 40 acres each for rent and eventual purchase by the newly freed people. When Union generals William Sherman, that's William T. Sherman, and Oliver Howard sought to act on the Freedmen Bureau's legislation by confiscating property abandoned by Confederates to provide for the formerly enslaved, Johnson voided all of these proposals. I'm going to read that again because this is very important. When Union generals William Sherman and Oliver Howard sought to act on the Freedmen Bureau's legislation by confiscating property abandoned by Confederates to provide for the formerly enslaved, Johnson voided all these proposals. So it's not like they were stripping people who were in the Confederacy of their land that they were on, right? And then saying, oh, well, let's give these to the slaves. No. They abandoned that land. They ran away like Israelis. They ran away. And so William Sherman and Oliver Howard were like, all right, well, we'll just give this to you as payment. And Andrew Johnson voided it. The debt that was owed was sitting there free and clear because it was abandoned and it was still voided by Andrew Johnson. That adds insult to injury, doesn't it? Frederick Douglass was correct when he said, whatever Andrew Johnson may be, he certainly is no friend of our race. On February 7, 1866, Douglass led a delegation from the Convention of Colored Men to meet with Johnson. Their goal was to secure a commitment to give Black men the vote and legal protection to exercise it. In response, the president bragged about being a slaveholder and claimed to have made great personal sacrifices for the people he owned. He expressed concern about poor whites who he believed suffered while Blacks were free. And he ended the meeting by suggesting that Black people leave the country. They're taking all of our jobs. They're leaving the poor white people without any employment. So you guys need to be deported. Does that sound familiar to you? History may not repeat itself, but it what? It what? Yes, damn sure rhymes. Yeah, there you go. His constant undermining of Reconstruction became too much for the radical Republicans to bear, and Johnson faced impeachment in 1867. The vote failed to get the two-thirds majority needed to remove him, and he served out the remainder of his term in office. During that time, he set the stage for the battle against true emancipation, eviscerating Reconstruction policies wherever he had the chance. Johnson vetoed a Freedmen Bureau's bill and a Civil Rights Act and returned confiscated land to former slaveholders. The same land that they abandoned, he gave it back to them. The land that they didn't work, the land that they didn't till, the land that they didn't have a damn bit of knowledge about. But yet he gave it back to them. These were the same people that were murderers, that were rapists, that were people who beat and maimed people. These were that people. the property was returned back to the criminals. We're going to call a thing, right? I'm having I'm having a black ass moment right now. We're going to call a thing, right? Let's keep it a buck. Because what is the difference between back then in the 1860s and now? What is the difference? Because you have people that are basically right now, we're wage slaves. We're basically chattel slaves with just a few extra steps, right? And the people who are stealing, all of our surplus value, wage theft, and all these different things away from us, they're the criminals. And who are they in bed with? They're in bed with the people who are running our government right now. It never changed. It never changed. This is who we are. This is who we have been. And some people will have some rose-colored glasses like, oh my God, America has done some great things at the expense of other people. They have done great things at the expense. We would have never went to the moon if it wasn't for the Soviets actually going into space. Because they would have never wanted to spend the money to do anything like that, because they would have thought it's too much of a risk. Because capitalists do not want to make risks with their money. But they depended on the state to be able to do it. So the state did and made all the risks and put all the money out there. And now, because now it's considered profitable, now you have people like Elon Musk sending his rockets. You have Jeff Bezos sending a huge phallus into the sky just so he can say, oh, I've been to space. Old dime store looking Jean-Luc Picard. Anyway. Americans hungry for hypotheticals should not be asking what would have happened if Lincoln dodged the assassin's bullet. Instead, they should wonder what have happened if his successor had been a true champion for human rights. Lincoln's survival may have meant colonization of 4 million people. They were emancipated despite his original objectives at the Civil War's outset. Emancipation might have been more meaningful and more effective if Johnson had not been so much like the man who had chosen him as vice president with little respect to his attitudes towards Black Americans. So when people talk about people like Dick Cheney and how evil Dick Cheney was, George W. Bush chose Dick Cheney for a reason. That's the evil behind George W. Bush. Barack Obama chose Joe Biden for a reason. That's the evil behind the thinking of Barack Obama. We can't just put all the blame on somebody like a Dick Cheney and say, well, he was the one that orchestrated everything. Yeah. But George W. Bush, he knew what he was doing. And people say, oh my God, well, he wasn't the smartest. Oh, George W. Bush was brilliant. He's actually a very brilliant man. He just doesn't want you to think he is so that you give him less credit for the evil that he's done. Shall we move on? Let's go to Ulysses S. Grant. I'm going to do that. All right, we'll do Ulysses S. Grant. 1869 to 1877. The man who came to be known as Ulysses S. Grant was born Hiram Ulysses Grant to a staunchly abolitionist father, Jesse Roots Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's daddy was a real one. Keep that in mind. The elder Grant for a time lived as an apprentice in the home of tanner Owen Brown in Deerfield, Ohio. Owen Brown, so he worked as a tanner with Owen Brown. Owen Brown was the father of John Brown, one of the realest white people to ever exist in this country. There's a reason why we don't talk shit about John Brown. Because John Brown was about that life. Let's continue. Whose father was John Brown, the man whose attempt to spark the slave uprising at Harper's Ferry led to the Civil War and indeed to the end of slavery. We need more Owen Browns, John Browns, and Jesse Root Grants. We need more of those to rise up. Jesse Grant's anti-slavery sentiments were well known, but his son Ulysses married into a Missouri slaveholding family shortly after his graduation from West Point. Once he was mustered out of the army in 1853, Ulysses lived among his in-laws and promptly forgot his abolitionist upbringing. According to the manumission papers of the man William Jones, Grant ignored his upbringing further by entering into the slave holding business himself. Grant made up for the sin of holding humans in bondage by waging total warfare and ending the practice once and for all with the military defeat of the slaveocracy. It was a war that ended slavery, not abolitionist opinion or Lincoln's oratory. Despite being raised by abolitionists, Grant voted in 1856 for pro-slavery Democrat James Buchanan over John Fremont, the Republican whose little-known Fremont emancipation would free slaves under Union Army control before Abraham Lincoln issued a better-known Emancipation Proclamation. In 1860, Grant was not yet eligible to vote in Illinois, his new state of residence, but he favored Democrat Stephen Douglas over Abraham Lincoln. Grant's attitudes typified those of many white Americans in the North. They may have been anti-slavery, but only because it was out of sight and out of their minds. If given the opportunity to profit from free labor, they would likely have acted as Grant did. However, Grant's father would have none of it and refused to help his son when he struggled financially. Quote from his father, "When you are ready to come north, I will give you a start, but so as long as you make your home among a tribe of slaveholders, I will do nothing." His daddy was a real one. He said, if you're going to be with those slaveholders, no, you ain't getting no help from me. You're cut off. I will have no part of this. No son of mine is going to be helping slave owners. Real ones in U.S. history. They exist. They exist. And we got to talk about them more. Let's talk about them more. Right? Grant rose from failure at farming and a variety of business ventures to redeem himself in his return to the army during the Civil War. He chose to side with patriots over traitors, but like his commander-in-chief, Abraham Lincoln, he was more concerned with saving the Union than with bringing about emancipation. Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee may have surrendered to Grant in April 1865, but the Confederacy refused to die. After his election and inauguration in 1869, Grant's efforts to protect Reconstruction met with mixed results. He supported legislation that gave him the right to declare martial law and suspend habeas corpus. He established the Justice Department in 1870 to help enforce Reconstruction-era protections for the newly freed population. So this is where the Department of Justice has been established. The success of the Reconstruction was always in question, as white Southerners did not take their defeat lying down, and white Northerners inevitably grew tired for fighting for Black people. The white revanchists knew that Grant and the rest of white America had no interest in keeping up the fight for Black people's human rights in the long term. Grant was the first post-Civil War president to make the claim that he supported the legal rights for Black people, yet he contradicted himself in opposing what became known as social equality. The enunciation of the term was kin to supporting segregation, and Grant made clear where he stood during his second inaugural address in 1873. Quote, social equality is not subject to be legislated upon, nor shall I ask anything be done in advance to the social status of the colored man, except to give him a fair chance to develop what there is good in him. End quote. Atrocities such as the 1873 massacre in Colfax, Louisiana, in which more than 100 Black men were killed on Easter Sunday by a mob of whites determined to oust Republican officials, proved this to be true. Only 9 of the 97 indicted were put on trial, and only 3 were convicted. Their convictions were overturned in an 1876 Supreme Court case, United States v. Cruikshank. The court ruled that the enforcement acts used to protect Black voting rights applied only to state actors and not to individuals, while whites who opposed Reconstruction knew that they only had to continue committing acts of terror in order to overthrow the small amount of progress made by Black people. The Colfax massacre was widely denounced, but the culprits were never punished. As was often the case in Reconstruction era atrocities, they managed to avoid jail even when apprehended. Grant left office under a cloud of scandal over actions carried out by political cronies. The bigger scandal was the end of what was left of the feeble federal effort to protect Black people from terrorism. Rutherford B. Hayes was the beneficiary of Grant's languor. Now, you could see how, even though Grant wasn't he wasn't really pushing for the emancipation of Black people, really just to keep the Union together, but there was strong influence from his father and from his father's workmate and a fellow tanner in belief in abolitionism. And yet Grant still ran away from what he knew to be right. This reminds me of Pete Buttigieg embracing capitalism and embracing the system as it is and neoliberalism, despite his father being a Marxist professor. Sometimes the children of revolutionaries are not their parents. Look at Martin Luther King III. Right? Look at people who had a revolutionary spirit, but then it died down. People like John Lewis. Or some people who were born from revolutionaries, but what are they doing now? They're not carrying out the same thing that their parents would have. It's just a lesson. All right, so we're going to do one more. Rutherford B. Hayes All right. What a name, Rutherford B. Hayes. From 1877 to 1881, let's begin now. Rutherford B. Hayes has gone down in history as Rutherfraud because of the scandalous way in which he attained the presidency. The Republican Hayes lost the popular vote to Democrat Samuel Tilden in 1876. Southern Democrats questioned the eligibility of Black voters in Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana as part of an ultimately successful plan to undermine Reconstruction. A 15-member commission of senators, congressmen, and Supreme Court justices finally ruled in Hayes' favor, but not without getting a promise to end once and for all the faltering federal commitment to Reconstruction. The Republican Party was considered the port while all else was the storm, but in the 1876 election, both parties were equally bad. I almost said white South Africans. Freudian slip. White Southerners were relentless in their quest to nullify the limited Black political power that had emerged after the Civil War, and the Republican Party wanted to move away from working to defend the rights of the newly freed people. Reconstruction hung by a thread when the wheeling and dealing began to determine the winner of the 1876 presidential election. Hayes' victory was not made official until March 2nd, 1877, just 2 days before the inauguration was to take place. On April 20th, 1877, Hayes ordered the reposting of the last remnants of federal troops who were stationed in South Carolina and Louisiana. Reconstruction had already been killed by a democratically controlled Congress, which would not appropriate funds to uphold the enforcement acts designed to ensure Black enfranchisement. In any case, the departure of the last federal troops effectively ended the last voting rights protections. I'm going to say this right here. If the push towards Reconstruction and the protection of Blacks, especially in the South, if that had continued, Black Wall Street in Oklahoma would still be in existence today. Rosewood would still be in existence today, and probably a very large, well-established Black neighborhood. The Ocoee Massacre would have never happened. Seneca Village would have remained a Black-owned piece of land that allowed them to be able to have power within their state of New York. If the efforts for Reconstruction were kept in place. But just like with a lot of good things that happen within this country, instead of taking it away completely, what they'll do is they'll do death by 1,000 cuts. This is why the VA is no longer as popular as it should be, because they cut and cut and cut and cut and cut so that it breaks down and it doesn't work as well. So people go, oh my God, the VA is so slow. Did you know that the VA has been in a hiring freeze for a very long time, even though they need more people? It's the same thing with the post office. It's the same thing with whatever Elon Musk's Doge is trying to do. It's death by 1,000 cuts to make it seem like government doesn't work because you actually take out all the nuts and bolts of the machine so that the machine doesn't work as well, so that it eventually breaks down. So then you think, oh, why do we have this machine in the first place? Even though if you had kept all the nuts and bolts in, if you had kept it maintenance, if you had kept it well oiled, it would have worked and it would have stood the test of time. So it would have been with the same thing with the Reconstruction efforts to protect us as a protected class, as a protected group, as a protected status within the United States. But they did not want that, because there were never their true intentions to protect us. It was just to keep the Union in place. Us be damned. Hayes had a career as a Union Army officer and claimed to care for the poor colored people of the South. But he betrayed those values because of ambition and political expediency. The press and most politicians had readily accepted the canard that the Reconstruction was a failure that allowed corrupt and incompetent Black men to hold office. DEI. DEI, because they were Black, oh, they were incompetent. They couldn't hold office. They weren't smart enough. Even though they pretty much knew everything that everybody else knew. But oh my God, it's DEI. Oh my God, it's affirmative action. Tales of Northern carpetbaggers and their Southern scallywag allies were accepted as true. A bloody war and 12 years of a guerrilla campaign had worn down what little resolve existed among white Northerners. So great was the bitterness and fear that many Southern Blacks spoke openly of leaving the Republican Party, but political leaders spoke out against confronting Hayes. John Langston, president of Howard University, declared that he had received from Hayes from his own lips the most positive assurances that it was the purpose of his administration to secure by any and every legitimate means within its power and control our protection, our promotion, and recognition. The Hayes administration was just the latest disaster to befall Black people since the start of the Civil War. Lincoln had been forced to fight for emancipation every time an enslaved person escaped to Union lines. Andrew Johnson had wanted no part of Reconstruction and was only prevented from undoing the 14th and 15th Amendments by the continued commitment to white Republican Northerners. Grant was supposed to be the president that would realize justice and equality for the newly freed people, but he had failed to fight effectively against those promoting the return of legalized white supremacy. By the time Hayes ran for president, the die was cast against Black people. They were literally outnumbered and outgunned. The hope and joy they had felt at emancipation proved to be illusory. The constant effort to find a friend between two dominant political parties began this ignominious tradition, which continues to the present day. Having made this deal with the devil to gain the presidency, Hayes did little while in office except veto legislation passed by the Democratic majority in Congress. In the winter of 1878 to 1879, the persistent violence extracted against Black people in the former Confederate states created a great exodus to Kansas. Called the Exodusers, as many as 40,000 people fled their homes in search for protection from mob rule. This process did nothing to inspire Hayes to action. Instead, he wrote in his diary on May 25th, 1879, quote, "The exodus of colored people from the South still attracts attention. The effect is altogether favorable. The tendency will be to force the better class of Southern people to suppress the violence of the ruffian class and to protect the colored people in their rights. Let the immigrants be scattered throughout the Northwest. Let them be encouraged to get homes and settle employment," end quote. Hayes wrote this nonsense in his diary, so it is safe to assume that he really believed it, or perhaps he was wishful thinking, meant to exculpate, exculpate his guilt at having thrown out the last bit of justice out of the window to secure his political fortunes. In any case, he lived up to his nickname, Rutherford Fraud, and began a long line of presidential betrayal. So that's Rutherford beat Hayes. We're going to stop there. A lot of truth. A lot of things that a lot of people have to come to terms with. And saying that, oh my God, well, we freed Black people. That wasn't really the goal, right? The goal, it was a kind of a secondary kind of win in their eyes. But in reality, they actually wanted to just keep the Union together. I'll give you an example. Some of you that may be gamers, okay? Some of you may not get it, so, okay. But in the game Final Fantasy VII, there is a point in history where these huge machines called weapons. And the weapons were designed to go after any entity that was threatening the life of the planet. Well, one of the weapons was going after the main enemies in the game in the city called Midgar. Weapon was called the Diamond Weapon. She had Diamond, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Ultima. Anyway, the Diamond Weapon was this huge, big monster created by the planet, was going to destroy the machine that was destroying the planet, right? Extracting all of its resources called Mako out of the planet. As it was on its way, there was a huge gun that was transported there called the Sister Ray. And their goal, Shinra Electric Power Company's goal, was to take away the barrier over the northern cave that Sephiroth had. Just so happened that Diamond Weapon was also standing in that direction. So when they shot towards the northern cave, it went through the Diamond Weapon, hit the northern cave, took off the barrier. But here's the thing. It was never really intended to take out the Diamond Weapon, but okay, two birds with one stone. So goes the same with actually the emancipation of Black people in this country. It was never the actual pure intention to actually emancipate us in this country. It was just, it was two birds with one stone. It was like, okay, well, you know, that's a consolation prize. Yay, we got that too. So we got the grand prize and we got the consolation prize. Our being freed was the consolation prize. But on top of that, what did they want to do? They wanted to ship us off to Panama to become settler colonials, just like, you know, they had the Zionists do. This is exactly how Britain had the Zionists do. But it never really happened. Then you have people like General Sherman that were like, okay, well, we have all this land that has been emptied, that has been abandoned by the Confederates, so we might as well just give this land to the enslaved people as reparations for being enslaved for, you know, as many years as they have. But then Andrew Johnson said, they ain't getting shit. Oh, and that same land that was abandoned by the Confederates, oh, you guys get to have that land back even though you ran away. So I really want people to come into terms with the hate and vitriol that has been established called white supremacy within this nation. And the white supremacy that was established in this nation was created as a apparatus to keep us as a third class, as a owned class. And so we talk about ending white supremacy and also ending the internalized white supremacy within us. This means taking and ripping out from us the notion, the laws, the ideas, the doctrines that have been set forth by the founding fathers of the country into placing one group of people under another group of people. And everybody goes, well, why did slavery exist? Well, slavery existed. Shadow slavery existed particularly for Black people because it was a means of classification. Because if you have somebody white that they're a slave, you really can't tell if they're slaves if they look like the people who are also in power. But if they look a little bit different, well, then you can set them apart. And so then the poor whites were given just a little bit more power as being overseers, police, and all the rest. And so in order to keep that, and in order to keep the poor whites and the enslaved or formerly enslaved Blacks from actually coming together and having worker solidarity, one group was given a little bit more power. And they were also told to resent the other group, even though they were a group without power. Now, I want you to think about who are we scapegoated against today who doesn't have power, but we're constantly told, oh, they're the reason why the country is going down. History does not repeat itself. It may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about knowing history. Because when you know this history, when you know what is actually going on back then, you can see the similarities and you can compare and contrast and say, well, they're pretty much trying to do the exact same thing. They're just switching out the different groups. And the institution of slavery still exists because in the 13th Amendment, there's still exception for slavery for people who are incarcerated. So was slavery truly abolished? Because if it was abolished, it wouldn't exist anywhere within this country. And yet, just go ahead and research Angola State Prison in Louisiana. So, with that being said, I hope you guys, gave a like to the stream. Thank you guys so much for all this. Before I go to the rest of the comments, I'm going to do a shout out to all the patrons on Patreon. Thank you so very much to everybody. You guys make this channel absolutely possible. So here are the tiers. We have Mega Jaybefaunters, Super Duper Jaybefaunters, Super Jaybefaunters, Jaybefaunters, Comrades, Healthy Bunch, Solidarity, and JB members. And I want to give a shout out to new members. I think I was supposed to give this person a shout out like a few weeks ago before I got sick, but we're going to do it now. Thank you to Daniel Aguirre, Luke Carlos, and Lusciously Sorry. Thank you very much for all of you becoming members of the channel and helping me to literally keep the lights on. I appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. You guys have no idea how much that helps me out. Thank you so very much. And by the way, just let you guys know that my channel is demonetized. So if you like to support the channel, you can support via Patreon or PayPal. So let's go to the comments in the chat and let's get what some of you guys were thinking as I was doing the reading. I know that this is, I went a little longer than what I wanted, but I felt it necessary to read these first three presidents of the Reconstruction era, because a lot of times we'll think, well, why did the Reconstruction era, why did it break down? How did we get to Jim Crow? Well, it was because the people in power didn't really care about actually doing true Reconstruction in regards to the people who were harmed the most. So, let me see. Let's go to Jacqueline said, does anyone think that this is because of Lincoln that the exception of the 13th Amendment was to put in to make it act more palatable for the states to ratify? This has only just occurred to me. So here's the thing. The ethos behind the 13th Amendment is kind of nefarious, because it's like, okay, we won't have slavery unless you are enduring punishment for a crime, right? And duly convicted for a punishment of a crime. But what does that mean? So sharecroppers had to rent all their goods, and the people who owned the land would charge them so much, but then they would charge them interest, and they would charge them more than what they could afford. And then by the time it came time for them to pay up, well, you guys don't have enough, so you guys are going to have to keep on working. So slavery was actually kept in place. It's just they were technically free. On top of that, if you were a Black person and you were committing the crime of vagrancy. What is vagrancy? Just being out and about aimlessly without any place to go. You could just be chilling, posted up. If you were done that, then they would arrest you for vagrancy because you weren't working. And so they would place you in jail. They would place you in jail for looking at white people wrong. They will place you in jail for anything and everything. So it just took slavery and then put it in the institutions of a lot of prisons. And a lot of these prisons were also former plantations. So the thing is that the slavery continued. And it's still continuing down to this day. And so that's the thing about Abraham Lincoln. It was never really actually about really freeing the slaves. It was really just about keeping the country together, because economically it was more powerful together than it was separate. Edward said Abraham Lincoln wanted African Americans out of the U.S., but I believe that Frederick Douglass convinced him that African people should stay. Lincoln thought that the African Americans were inferior. Yeah, Lincoln was actually a racist. Let's be real. Thank you very much for that, Rose. Thank you. Kate Max said, yup, and nothing in school history about it. Yup. This is why I'm doing this channel, because I'm hoping that people like my nieces and my nephews and my friends, they stumble upon this and they're like, oh my God, this is all very interesting. Edward Cortez says Andrew Johnson was a racist. They all are. They all were, for the most part. Edward said Larry Elders had the nerve to say the slave owners deserve reparations. Ah! That's hilarious. Mouse says, love your dancing balloon, JB. Oh, yeah, that's because the fan is on, but that's my balloon that my nephew got me for recovery at the hospital. So thank you very much. Roger Meadows says, land abandoned by Confederates who fled to Brazil and other South American countries, taking their racist philosophy to South Americans. That's why you find anti-Black sentiment in a lot of South Americans today. That was part of it. That was another part was that a lot of them, they had a caste system, and, you know, because the Spanish were also racist too. And the Portuguese were racist. And so they took, and some of that was reinforced by, you know, some of the slave owners fleeing. But yeah, the anti-Black sentiment is there because they wanted, you know, they want Black people to seem as inferior. But the fortunate part is that a lot of countries, especially like Brazil, they embrace their African culture quite a bit, though there are still elements of white supremacy even in places like Brazil, you know. And of course, you know, you have the indigenous Brazilians that are actually fighting against the actual government of Brazil, especially in regards to them tearing down the Amazon rainforest and things like that. And so they're doing basically to the indigenous Brazilians what they did to the indigenous Americans here. So there's a lot of that still going on too. So there's a lot of similarities there. Thank you very much for that, Roger. Sheila says, well, we're still paying for this now privatized space travel. Absolutely. And in fact, I think Elon Musk secured an account with the U.S. government for Starlink, I think it was. I don't know. I think he may have secured it. I could be wrong on that. But, you know, he's trying to cut all this money out for Doge. But at the same time, he's also getting more money for contracts, which is also increasing his own personal wealth. That's a conflict of interest, isn't it? He's using the government for his own personal gain. So he says Grant was an alcoholic. I believe it. I believe it. Savita said he had a better GPA than Obama. George W. Bush said it helped that people thought that George W. Bush was stupid, just like now they think Trump is stupid. Yeah, Trump is not a stupid person. Trump is, when it comes to extraction of resources from people trying to get the most bang for his buck, he's actually really good at what he does. Because you got to remember, he's a Nepo baby. And one thing I learned, because somebody was talking about the myth of meritocracy in this country, is that let's say you have two groups. You have a group of kids that are poor and working poor, and then you have a group of kids that are born rich and wealthy, right? It's not enough that they have natural ability, right? They can have natural ability, but then who gets the tutoring and the training more and more and more, so then they come out on top, even though you may give some of the training to the kids who are on the lower rungs, but because the ones at the top get more tutoring, they get the best training, they get the best tools, then guess what? They're going to be always slightly higher because they were given more resources in order to seem like they have more merit. But if you were to take the training, the education, and then spread it evenly among all the students, things would be a lot more different. But yeah. Roger says, JB, give him props to the original JB. Yeah, John Brown was, oof. Oh my goodness. So Sila says, plantation owners and northern companies that profited from the labor of insurance of enslaved people in the United States are no different than individuals today who invest and profit from poverty. Yes, absolutely. Companies, I think like Aetna, and I think Wells Fargo, they actually did insurance claims for slaves. So if in case something happened to your slave, well, guess what? You got insurance money for it, just like you would for a vehicle. And Sila says, this is why capitalism is toxic for our societies, no matter how many want decorated with technology and xenophobic supremacist nationalism. Absolutely. Thank you so very much for that. Chris C. says, the Constitution sadly never applied to the Black community from the time it was written, being legitimized under Dred Scott and gaslit by originalist interpretations by modern judges. And to double down, natives can't get their freedom, especially since their commerce is entirely regulated by the federal government. It's a means to control and extract money and resources out of the marginalized. That continues down to this day, definitely. Yes, Kaya Grigors, thank you so very much. Good to see you. Michael Pan said Lincoln wanted to maintain slavery by mediating between slave masters and Black American slaves. It's like he wanted to, it's almost like he wanted to ride the fence, right? Like, okay, well, I don't want to actually free them, but I don't want to spread the slavery. And it's like, no, baby, you can't ride the fence on this one. You're either on one side or the other. There is no neutrality when it comes to this. It's the same thing with Gaza and Israel. There is no neutrality. You cannot be in the in-between. You can't be, well, one side, the other side. No. One side is holding all the cards. They hold all the power. They hold all the keys. And the other side are the ones being subject to atrocities and genocide right now. And the power is completely imbalanced. It is incongruent. So therefore, that means that there is one side that's being oppressed and the other side that's doing the oppressing. Therefore, there is no both sides. You cannot both sides this. And it's the same thing with how Black Americans were treated, especially during Reconstruction or lack thereof. During chattel slavery, during Jim Crow, during the redlining, during the experiments that were done on our bodies. All these different things. There is no in-between because there's a power imbalance. There's no such thing as Black supremacy as an institution within the United States. Because if the Black supremacy actually existed within these United States, then we would be able to withhold things like economics, jobs, housing, education, food, healthcare from white people. We would be able to do so, but it does not exist. There is no Black supremacy within this nation, but there is white supremacy. And is it a means to keep a certain group of people at a particular level so that people see, oh, I don't want to end up like them. This is why a lot of immigrants will come here and they will imitate whiteness before they'll imitate anything else. Because they'll see, oh, the Black people on the bottom, I can't be like that. So I got to be like these people. So then it becomes a survival technique. Right? That's what it is. It becomes a means of self-preservation. That's what anti-Blackness is. It's a means of self-preservation under the system of white supremacy. And it's breaking down as we see it, especially within this country. Now, will it still exist once the United States ceases to exist as it is? Yes, because unfortunately, that stain is still there. It's just like trying to get blood out of a white cloth in the wash. It is very hard to do. Even though you may get a lot of it out, you'll still be able to look it up in the light and still see it. So it's going to have to be an ongoing process of us decolonizing our minds and taking away the white supremacy, even in us, because we have internalized white supremacy. A lot of us Black people do too. And so when that happens, then once we extract that out of ourselves, once we do it fully, then we will actually have true equity and equality within this country. But until then, we won't have it. But we still have to pursue it in order to get it out. It's like washing that cloth and adding bleach, or sometimes if it's blood, more peroxide to it to extract that out. And then letting it sit and then washing it out. You have to do it over in steps. There's levels to this. Lincoln ordered the largest mass hanging of indigenous Dakota. 50 hanged for allegedly stealing food after being forced, marched, and placed in concentration camps. Yeah, they were definitely also no friend to the indigenous. And they have a lot that's happened to them too. Yes, just like northern states needed slavery to be covert, Guess who also needs wage slavery and fascism to be a covert? The Democrats. So think about the Democrats as the northern states in the real way that they were, and then think about the Republicans as the southern states and the Confederacy. And realize that neither side are friends to the working class. One will fake their devotion to the working class, but in reality, they have absolutely no devotion, no love, no sense of a need to give justice to the working class. So this is why both parties need to be abandoned. Both. Roger says, DM, read the big print. Okay, Roger, because I'm going longer than when I wanted, and I know Sabi's going live in like 15 minutes. So I'm trying to make this very quick. Okay, says what the list gets right. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846 and the presidency in 1860. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946 and the presidency in 1960. But it's a coincidence that their election years were 100 years apart. Federal elections occur only in even years. Yeah. That's from a USA Today article. Thank you very much for that, Roger. Okay. Michael says, Jaybefaunt, do you consider cash payment reparations for Black American freedmen of chattel slavery as equitable outcomes? I consider equitable outcome is whatever we as a group decide on, especially in a democratic way, as to what we need. And I say cash payments are a definite yes. Now, if we want to do other types of recompense on top of the cash payments, I say yes to that as well. But cash payments, yes. Because the thing is like, as somebody that believes in land back, to be honest with you, you're going to have to give us cash. You're going to have to. Now, if there's some federal land that they want to give away to us, I say, okay, but let's also talk to the Native Americans also before that happens. But yes, cash payments, yes. The Freedmen's Bureau, placed back, yes, absolutely. And the Freedmen's Bureau being well funded. And the thing is like all the money that could be paid back to those of us who are Black American freedmen. The amount of money that there's really no amount of money you ever can really pay back for all the atrocities. But as far as the loss of labor value and homes and businesses and lives and things like that, pain and suffering, right? That could have all been paid just through how much money we lost through the Pentagon over the last 20 years. It could have all been paid by them. Instead of paying for these wars, instead of paying for Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, they could have been paying us. But they decided not to because they want to give it to the people who make machines of death and destruction instead of giving it to the people who they've harmed. Reparations could have been paid a long time ago, but they didn't want to because they needed to keep an underclass. And as long as this country exists, an underclass will exist. And what I mean is, as long as this country exists as it is, it will exist. But fortunately for us, this nation is in entropy. It is circling the drain. The empire is falling. And we do not have much longer before this empire is completely done away with. So while I still say we fight for reparations right now, just like we continue to fight for universal health care, right? And we keep that idea alive, I say that once we establish a new government that's actually a worker-centered government, then that's when we will actually get it. But it will constantly be in their minds, oh, reparations for the American descendants of slavery. Oh, healthcare for everybody, right? Oh, housing for all. Oh yeah, we got this climate change. We got to keep these at the forefront of our minds, right? We got to keep the justice and the means of justice at the forefront of our minds. But that's how I think it will happen. But it's on its way out, as we can see. Michael Pan says, how do you explain cash payment reparations to Black American baby boomers and Black American conservatives? If somebody does something bad to you and you take them to court and you get sued and that lawsuit goes completely through, then therefore you are on the hook for the pain, suffering, and damages that you have incurred to that person. This country has never paid for the pain, suffering, and damages that it has incurred, including lost wages, to those of us who are American descendants of slavery. So freedmen. So therefore, it is still owed. They never paid it to the original people who were enslaved. So therefore, that goes to the next descendants, and then their descendants, and then their descendants, and then their descendants. My fifth great grandfather, who was born in 1792, cannot get his reparations payment because he is passed. But remnants of that man still exist. And so therefore, the reparations should be paid to the descendants, because just like you have generational wealth, there's also generational poverty. So therefore, an equalizing has to take place. It's not a matter of handing out. It's a matter of back pay and paying back what you owe. Everybody wants to talk about, oh, you got to pay back your bills. Well, guess what? America got a big ass bill. It's called reparations. And they still haven't paid it. They still haven't yet to even put a dime onto it. That's how I explain it. Roger says, make sure you read the rest of the USA Today article, like JFK, Lincoln being killed by a bullet to the head on Friday. Both BP named Johnson, one killed in the Ford Theater, one riding a Ford. Yeah, I've actually seen that comparison years ago in an email chain. So I know about that one too. But anyways, so I got to get going because I know Sabi's going to be starting in 10 minutes and I don't want to overlap with her. But I just want to say thank you very much for everybody that has tuned in. I wanted to make this a very, good, solid reading. I wanted to get back to the basics, especially when it comes to educating myself and then bringing all of you for the ride. So thank you so very much for tuning in. Of course, next week, the plan is to have on Jordan Sheridan. We're going to have a redo. And so I do plan on doing that on Tuesday, on the 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I might still do the JB show this Sunday. I'm thinking about it. There's a couple of news stories that I'm thinking about right now that's going on too that I want to focus on. And so then, of course, I will try to continue in the readings to, get myself back to square one so that we can continue in the direction that I have set for myself. So thank you very much to everybody. I want you guys to go over Flood Sally Sabs and let her know that I sent you, right? She's about to have a panel on too about Black people in independent media, which should be a really good one. I wish I could be part of it, but I talk too much anyway. But thank you very much, everybody. And it's like I always say, water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Smoke them if you got them, drink them if you got them. If you ain't got them, then do whatever you can in order to enjoy life, because joy is revolutionary. And I love you guys for watching. You guys have been amazing. Forehead kisses. I will see you guys in the next one. Deuces, Bruces. And thank you for all your support. Thank you so very much for watching my channel, and I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah. Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.